Paint the Wind by Pam Munoz Ryan, Chapter 17. Stay close to me and away from that drop-off, said Aunt Vi. I am not ready to lose either of you to the Great Divide Basin. Maya, Aunt Vi, and Peyton sat on their horses at an overlook and gazed out at the infinite crater of desert. Below them, the honeycomb buttes rose abruptly from the basin floor in peculiar sandstone spires of rust brown and green. In the east, continental peaks saluted, and in the west, the Oregon buttes lay like a sleeping giant. Have you ever seen anything like it? Asked Aunt Vi. Maya shook her head. She might as well have been on an alien planet. Was she really here, on her way to see the wild horses? She'd hardly been able to sleep last night for thinking about this very moment. First thing this morning, Aunt Vi had been surprised to find her warming her hands over the campfire, already dressed and waiting. After breakfast, they had loaded Russell, Homer, and Seltzer into the gooseneck trailer, and Aunt Vi had driven Maya and Peyton south along the Continental Divide. Now, Aunt Vi turned her horse north, and Maya and Peyton followed on theirs. The mirage of a shimmering lake appeared before them, but as they rode closer, it vanished. What Maya thought was a congregation of rocks on a hillside manifested into a herd of pronghorn. She gasped and chills ran up her arms as she watched them flee across the panorama in a graceful, white-bottomed ballet. It's a mysterious place out here, Maya. I am always amazed, too, at the beauty and the strangeness of it all. Maya nodded and felt an odd expectation, as if something unusual might happen at any moment. She knew it was a ridiculous notion, but she imagined that when she caught her first glimpse of Artemisia, she might see her mother sitting on the horse too, or would at least feel her presence. Out here, where the eye played tricks, it almost seemed possible. They stopped, dismounted, haltered the horses, and tied them to the woody sagebrush. Aunt Vi led them to the crest of a hill above Oregon Gulch, where they sat cross-legged, waiting. Aunt Vi, are there any ghost horses out there? Asked Maya. Aunt Vi smiled. Who told you about ghost horses? My mother. She said the only way to capture a ghost horse is to paint the tail of the wind. I can paint the wind, said Peyton. Want me to show her how fast I can ride, Aunt Vi? Peyton, we just sat down. Now stay put. All you do is scare off every living thing for miles. There are a lot of ghosts out there, including Artemisia. It's that stark white coat against the darkness that makes believers out of skeptics. Aunt Vi almost whispered. She's the most beautiful, though. Aunt Vi, why can't you just take Artemisia back if she belonged to you? Asked Maya. Peyton, why? Because it would be too dangerous, said Peyton. That's right. I'd need a group of wranglers to separate her from a possessive stallion. She was born wild and knows how to survive out here, so I've let her be. That decision wasn't easy, though, and I miss her. Won't the wild horses try to steal our horses? No way, said Peyton. They only try to steal mares. Our horses are boy horses, and the stallion has to be the only grown-up boy in a wild horse family. He doesn't like any competition. If another male horse came close, he would fight him and drive him away. Sometimes one stallion tries to steal another stallion's mare, and then there's a giant fight, and they rear and bite each other and kick each other, and there's blood. Aunt Vi put a hand on Peyton's arm to settle him. She lifted her glasses. Look, there's a family in the distance heading toward the waterhole. Stay nice and still. No sudden moves. Maya's mouth wetted with anticipation, and she licked her lips. She looked through the binoculars and saw 5 horses emerge between the hollow of 2 hills. Aunt Vi whispered, "There's Sergeant, the stallion. He's the palomino behind the rest of them. Isn't he beautiful?" Sergeant reminded Maya of the landscape, raw and untamed. His coat was marked with nicks and scars, his forelock dangling in stringy mop-like bangs. And see the flaxen mare? That's Georgia. And there's Mary, the 2-year-old. She looks more like Sergeant with that palomino color. Artemisia is right in the front. Do you see her, Maya? Maya held her breath and then reminded herself to exhale. She leaned forward and tried to hone in on Artemisia, but the horse appeared blurry through the lenses. Maya took a deep breath to calm herself as she focused the binoculars. The image sharpened. Artemisia didn't have the sleek look of the Remuda horses or the groomed and trimmed face of the horse she had seen in the photo. Witch's knots tangled her mane and tail, dirt crusted on her round barrel, and her legs and face were shaggy with wispy hairs. But even so, there was a strength of character about her in the way she walked, in the way she held her head with royal forbearance. Artemisia gazed toward Maya as if she were looking directly through the binoculars and into her eyes. Something fluttered deep inside Maya. She knows we're here. She knows, and so do Sergeant and the others. But they're used to me watching them and bringing people around. I like to think that Artemisia remembers me. Maybe something about my body posture or my scent. Aunt Vi's voice caught with affection. Oh, Maya, look right behind Artemisia, between the other 2 mares. There's the foal, Clee. Clee stood out in contrast to the others. His hair looked new and soft and fluffy, his face animated and almost whimsical. Maya wished she were close enough to touch him. She couldn't take her eyes from his antics and found herself smiling. He was so curious and filled with spunk, and he seemed to love his mother with brazen adoration. Aunt Vi scanned with the binoculars. Where's Wyeth? I see him, said Peyton. See, Aunt Vi? Over on that hill. He's trying to come to the water hole, but Sergeant won't let him. It's time, said Aunt Vi. Maya shifted her gaze and saw the lone horse wander away. Time for what? She asked. To leave the family. The stallion drives the mature males away when they're between 2 and 3 years old to prevent inbreeding. And because the young male's desire is to be rambunctious and disruptive. Ever heard the phrase, sow his wild oats? That's what Wyeth will do now until he's ready to settle down. Aunt Vi, said Peyton, can I ride back? Go ahead. Keep Homer steady at the lope and don't let him work into a gallop. Yes, meet you at the trailer. Peyton ran toward his horse. Aunt Vi laughed. Sometimes it seems as if that boy is already sowing his wild oats. It seems so cruel to the boy horses, said Maya. Oh, it's not much different in human families. There comes a time when children must leave home and find their own way in the world, like your mother did, like you and Peyton will do someday. As heart-wrenching as it seems, in a few years, Clee will be sent away from the band too. Maya and Aunt Vi lifted their binoculars. Maya watched as Artemisia nibbled Clee's neck and then wrapped her large head and neck around his body. Maya felt a pang of jealousy. Had her mother ever cuddled her with such devotion? She's a good mother, said Aunt Vi, and a good lead mare. As much as I miss her, I can tell she's happy. How did Artemisia get to be the lead mare? Asked Maya. The mare who puts herself in the position of leader becomes it, said Aunt Vi. But how did Artemisia know she was the leader? Oh, Maya, there's so much we humans don't know about knowing. With horses, it's not the biggest or oldest who is the lead. It's the horse who has the confidence to guide the family in times of danger, who has knowledge of the land and knows the routes to safety, who is herd smart and can make alliances with other mares and keep peace. Some mares have the ability, others don't. Think about great human leaders. They have many of those same qualities. Maya thought about what Aunt Vi had just said and lowered her binoculars. Like you, Aunt Vi. Aunt Vi continued to watch the horses for a few moments, then set the binoculars aside and swiped her forearm across her eyes. Maya, remember how I told you about how much your mother loved the Sweetwater and how it filled up her heart like no other place could? Maya nodded and turned to look at Aunt Vi, whose eyes shined a little too bright. I never married or had a family of my own, and your mother filled up a place in my heart that I didn't think could be filled up ever again, until Peyton appeared behind them, holding all three horses by their reins, breathless and panting. Aunt Vi! She smiled at Maya. Guess he saved me from falling into the mush pot. What is it, Peyton? Aunt Vi, there's a copter in the canyon. Aunt Vi sucked in air and her face crumpled with disappointment. No. What's happening? Asked Maya. Come on, said Peyton. Hurry. Aunt Vi hastened toward the horses and Maya ran after her. As they mounted, Aunt Vi said, At least you got to see them. Before. Maya demanded, Before what? The clapping of helicopter blades and the buzz of a motor intensified. The machine appeared on the horizon, swooping and zigzagging like a giant bumblebee across the wide canyon. Miles of net fencing had been set up as a trap, wider at one end of the canyon than at the other, funneling into a narrow chute and ending in a large circular holding pen. Wild horses pounded forward, panicked and snorting. Their coats glistened with sweat. A young filly hurried to keep up with her mother. A stallion stumbled and was jostled forward with the stampeding throng. A mare struggled behind, lame. Hoarse screams echoed in the canyon. Maya, Peyton, and Aunt Vi sat on a ridge and watched. It's a gather, but it's not pretty, is it? Maya shook her head. The word gather sounded so gentle, but there was nothing gentle about this. Why are they taking them? Many reasons, and it's complicated. The government rounds them up every few years to keep the wild horse population under control. And there's a lot of pressure on them to keep doing just that, whether it's necessary or not. Some ranchers think they damage the grazing land for their cattle. Some people think they drink too much water, but there's a counter argument for all of those opinions. Others say they're just feral horses, broomtails, left over from old ranches and domesticated stock that have learned to survive in the wild. Some may be, but now there are scientists who believe that mustangs are a wild species native to North America. Regardless of their origin, there are many people who wish they were more protected. What's going to happen to them? The prettiest and youngest will get purchased at auctions, like the one where I adopted Artemisia. Others will be bought by people who work for sanctuaries, protected places where they can live peacefully in freedom. But there's plenty of land here, and they're already free, said Maya. That's a point that is often made. Unfortunately, we've done this many times in our country, rounded up people or animals and released them someplace else when they were just fine where they were. What happens to the others, the leftovers? Peyton lowered his binoculars and seemed eerily calm. They auction them off, and lots of them are bought and killed for their meat. Then they ship it to other countries. They used to sell the horses to slaughterhouses to make dog food out of them. The law to protect the horses is often challenged by legislators to satisfy certain voters whose livestock graze on the public land, said Aunt Vi. Wild horses eat grass and don't make money for anyone. Their value is not understood by everybody. Yet this country was born on the backs of horses. Horses moved people from place to place so the country could be developed. They tilled the land and became our trusted mounts and allies in war. As a species, they reached out to us as much as we did to them. They became our companions. See how alive they are and filled with energy and abandon. In a matter of days, if we return to this holding pen, you'll see how dispirited they've become. Imagine being free and then separated from your family and put in confinement. Maya didn't have to imagine. Her emotions stirred. She looked out at the infinite and unpopulated landscape and ached for the horses. Artemisia had once been separated from her own mother during a gather. Now she might lose Clee in the same way. Aunt Vi's binoculars swept back and forth across the string of horses. There's Sargent, Georgia and Mary, and even Wyeth. He must have been trailing after them. The rope-waving Mustangers rode abreast behind the last of the captured horses until the holding pen gate was slammed shut. What about Artemisia and Clee? Asked Maya. Aunt Vi continued to study the confused and anxious horses milling in the corral. They're missing. Maya blew out a sigh of relief. That's good, right? Aunt Vi put her binoculars in her saddlebag. Her forehead creased with apprehension. Maybe, maybe not. If they'd been captured, Maya, I would have had the chance to prove that Artemisia belongs to me. She still carries the ranch brand. But now, without the protection of a stallion, she and Clee are vulnerable. What could happen to them? Asked Maya. Aunt Vi looked at her in a way that told her the unimaginable could happen. They didn't talk on the ride back to the trailer or in the truck on the way back to camp. Peyton slumped against the passenger door. Aunt Vi stared straight ahead at the road. Maya leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. She could not stop thinking about Artemisia and Clee, nor could she squash her overwhelming desire to get on a horse and ride out to find them. Chapter 18. Artemisia knew what the sound of the repetitive flopping meant. It meant to run with panic within a frantic throng. It meant bloodied cannons from the crush of hooves and lather so thick from exertion that it flung into one another's eyes. Artemisia's instincts had told her that Clee could not survive the fury. so she had veered away from the cloud of dust and the swath of ground that had been trampled smooth by hundreds of thundering hooves. They had been on their own for several days now, wandering north of the gulch toward the Sweetwater River. It was almost dark. A sage grouse flew from a clump of brush. Artemisia lifted her head in the direction of the rustle, her ears contorting to determine the cause. The wind shifted, and she smelled the mountain lion. Artemisia kept close to Clee. With her foal at her side, she galloped toward open land where she would have a chance against an attack. The mountain lion would be alone. It was a solitary creature with no need for companionship. In wide open space, Artemisia might be able to stave off a single predator. Once, from a high ridge, she had watched a mountain lion stalk and kill a pronghorn. The huge cat had stayed downwind and well hidden in the brushy foothills. With its tawny belly close to the ground, it sleuthed forward. Then it waited, patient and quiet, in the sagebrush. As the intended prey drifted closer, the cat's black-tipped ears twitched and its back swayed. It squatted onto its powerful hind legs and leaped 20 feet to the pronghorn's back. With one vicious bite on the neck, it immobilized and killed the victim. After satisfying its hunger, the mountain lion covered what was left of the carcass with dirt and leaves to be revisited for future meals. Now the scent grew stronger. A shadow shifted, and Artemisia saw the crouching lion. Her ears flattened and her nostrils flared. She clamped down her tail and squealed a terrifying warning. The cat sprang, and Artemisia felt the eerie, tingling sensation of something swooshing toward her. She reared and met the attacker with pummeling hooves. The surprised cat fled. Artemisia huddled close to Clee. With swift determination, she chose a path and led him away. They needed to leave the area. The mountain lion was hungry, and it would stalk them again and again until it was successful. Chapter 19. Maya and Peyton heard the distinctive throttle of Moose's truck and raced from the river side by side to the campsite. Already free of the cab, Golly bounded toward the two cousins, pouncing at their feet, barking and licking their outstretched hands. Moose and Fig climbed from the cab and moseyed forward. Moose gave Maya a sidearm hug. "Well now, how's the frontier girl?" Her words spewed. "We saw the wild horses. There was a roundup, but it's really called a gather. And Artemisia and Clee, Clee is Artemisia's new foal. Well, they're missing. We looked for them all day yesterday, but couldn't find them in their usual places. Aunt Vi said they could be anywhere, but we're determined to keep looking. And guess what? I can lope really fast." "Of course you can," said Uncle Fig, as he held Peyton under his arm in a headlock and tousled his hair. "Come on, Golly," said Peyton, breaking free. "I'll show you the beaver dam near Maya's teepee." He ran toward the river and the dog followed, but Maya stayed back. Aunt Vi emerged from the office tent, greeted Fig and Moose, and with her usual sense of urgency, passed supplies from the bed of the truck to any willing hands. Maya accepted a bag of groceries and walked alongside them toward the campsite. "Is this the same girl we left out here a few weeks back?" asked Moose. Maya smiled and nodded. "Can't be," said Fig. "This girl is a little taller, got more color in her face, and can lope really fast." "You two stop pestering," said Aunt Vi. "Part of her is new and part of her is the same. Once I got her on a horse, she found her heart just like her mother. They dropped off the bags in the pantry and headed back to the truck for another load. So the story you told us about the horses, that true, Maya? Asked Moose. Yes, I'm not lying, am I, Aunt Vi? You can believe every word she says these days. Vi, you think Artemisia and her colt could be along the river? Asked Fig. They paused over the truck bed. I don't know, said Aunt Vi. I'm not sure why they weren't with the herd during the gather. Since Artemisia was captured once before, maybe she shied at the sound of the helicopter. Months ago, I saw her band at a clearing near the river a few times, which was an odd place for them to be, since it's so far from their usual range. Artemisia might migrate back there out of habit, or she might go someplace completely different if she felt threatened. Aunt Vi says that it would be hard for them to survive without the protection of the stallion, said Maya, her voice sounding forlorn and desperate. But now there's not that many stallions because of the gather, and horses want to be around other horses. And one of the saddest things on earth is a wild horse without a family. They just wander around, sad and lonely, until maybe something bad happens. Well, then, we'd better get them back, Maya Bird, said Moose, handing her another bag of groceries. He turned to Aunt Vi. That horse is branded and rightfully yours. I know. If they've been taken into another band, said Aunt Vi, I'll leave them in the wild. But if they're struggling on their own, I'd sure like to bring them here. Yes, we'd like to bring them here, repeated Maya. Can we go looking for them after lunch? She asked. Please? Moose looked toward the winds and pointed. We can, unless that weather catches up to us. Veiled fingers of purple and black descended from the sky. The rains pelted. Clouds flashed and tossed thunderous accusations back and forth. The plastic chairs around the campfire were moved into the kitchen tent where the campers hunkered together. Moose and Fig dashed out to feed the horses and dig trenches to redirect encroaching puddles. After 2 days of intermittent downpours and what seemed like hundreds of card games with Peyton, listening for hours to Moose read from a Louis L'Amour novel, and Uncle Fig's lessons on the Latin names of the flora and fauna of Wyoming, Maya tired of the kitchen tent. She poked her head into the field office where Aunt Vi was catching up on her work. Can I come in? Be my guest. I was wondering how long you'd last in there with the boys. Maya looked around at the haphazard untidiness. Aunt Vi sat on a folding chair at the desk. Slick-covered horse magazines littered the floor. On the canvas walls, Aunt Vi had pinned an array of photographs of the wild horses with their names scrawled across the borders. You need any help? Asked Maya. Make any amount of order out of this chaos and I'll be grateful. I'd love to have those boxes unpacked. I'm working on an article called The Native Horse Through the Artist's Eye for a journal, and then I need to start on my fall lesson plans for my art history classes. Lightning flashed and illuminated the tent. Maya held her breath until the thunder crashed around them. Aunt Vi continued to work, unconcerned. Maya took a deep breath and began to unpack the boxes, taking out oversized art books one by one, smoothing her hand across each cover. John Singer Sargent, Artemisia Gentileschi, Olaf Seltzer, George Catlin, Charles Russell, N.C. Wyeth, Mary Cassatt. Maya smiled and examined the photos of the wild horses pinned to the walls of the tent, matching them with the corresponding art books. She studied a photo of a black stallion with the white blaze and white stockings. Aunt Bai, this looks like the horse my father painted. You're right. That's Remington. Isn't he magnificent? He's tried to steal Artemisia from Sargent's band a few times, but has never succeeded. Horses have their own personalities, their own ways to get what they want. Like people? Asked Maya. It's more the other way around. People are like horses. Sargent is more of a warrior. He doesn't hesitate to fight to get what he wants. Remington would protect his own, but his approach to getting his way is different. He is a patient opportunist, waiting until a stallion drops his guard before moving in. I still see Remington racing along the top of a ridge with a few bachelors. He doesn't have a mare yet. It would be nice if he was still pining for Artemisia. She and Clee could use the protection. Aunt Bai stood and stretched. I'm going to make a sandwich. You hungry? Maya shook her head. She stacked the magazines into neat piles with their spines all facing the same direction. She aligned the books alphabetically and straightened the reports and papers. There was something satisfying in putting it all into order for Aunt Bai, and Maya found herself humming. While sorting a stack of files, she came across a tattered envelope of photos. The contents caused her to stop and sink cross-legged to the ground. She laid the series of photographs in a line. Maya's mother with Aunt Bai in front of a split rail fence, their arms around each other. A 4-year-old Maya holding Moose's hand and walking in the pasture. Maya and Peyton on Fig's lap in a porch rocker. Her mother riding Artemisia bareback with nothing more than a rope around the horse's barrel. And a duplicate of the photo Maya had in her shoebox. Maya gathered the pictures, tucked them inside her jacket, and dashed through the rain and mud to the kitchen tent. She found Moose reading and Uncle Fig and Peyton playing checkers. She handed the photographs to Moose. What's that rope on Artemisia? He studied the photo. Maya bird, I'd forgotten about that. We called it a Comanche coil. Tribes of the Great Plains Indians use this technique to ride without a saddle or reins. They wrapped a rope around the horse in a giant belly loop, sat bareback, and tucked their knees under the rope on either side. They held on by slipping a hand underneath the rope where it crossed the withers. The American Indians were such great horsemen that they could hunt and fight wars from that position. Fig looked up from the checkers game. We told your mother about the belly loop, and she couldn't rest until she tried it. Ellie was fearless. Like me? Asked Peyton. No, said Fig, grinning. You're fearless like a bull in a china shop. Ellie was fearless, but kept her wits about her. She always wanted to try something new, but she thought about it carefully before she did it. Maya leaned on Moose's arm as he flipped through the photographs. He reached the one of her mother on Artemisia, laughing and waving. I remember this. Know who your mom was smiling and waving at? Maya shook her head. It was you, said Moose. I was holding you in my arms, and a hawk flew overhead, round and round in circles. You burst out in a fit of giggles, pointing to the sky. Ellie was so tickled with your reaction that she started laughing out loud too, and Aunt Vi took the picture. Maya stared at the photo. Her mother had been waving to her. She had been the one to make her mother so happy. A kernel of contentment planted itself in her mind. She slid away from Moose's side and pulled back the window flap on the tent. Showers swept across the campsite, but she looked beyond the curtains of water. She could already imagine Artemisia and Clee in the corral. She would feed them and pet them. She would talk to them too and tell them 1,000 little things. She even imagined herself riding Artemisia like her mother had. When can we look for Artemisia and Clee? She asked. As soon as this rain lets up, Maya, said Moose. And I hope it stops soon, or we'll all be in the river. The earth sopped up the relentless water from the clouds, and the river brimmed with renewed energy. Mornings brought more riding lessons and sometimes fishing with Fig and Moose. Afternoons, Aunt Vi, Maya, and Peyton took long rides to search for Artemisia and Clee. They rode for miles on one of the California pioneer trails. They paralleled an old railroad grade. They trailered to the Elkhorn Draw and back out to the Honeycomb Buttes. At first, when they arrived back in camp without news, they remained optimistic. But after several weeks, they returned from their searches quiet and pensive. Peyton stopped going with them, preferring to stay at camp with Fig and Moose. Aunt Vi told Maya they needed to take a break from the long rides so she could catch up on her work and give the horses a rest. But Maya didn't give up hope. Every night before she went to sleep, she took out the little black stallion, swept it above her head, and whispered, "Don't worry, Artemisia. I am coming for you."